What do young people get completely wrong about past decades? The concept of convenience was non-existent compared to today. For example, in the early days of eBay, you had to win an auction, then go to the bank, get a certified check or money order, mail it out to the person, deposit it, wait for it to clear, and then, if they were legit, mail out the item. As a seller, you'd have to randomly guess what the shipping rates would be, as you couldn't check online. There were no printable shipping labels online. You had to do it all at the post office, so you could easily wait 6 to 8 weeks for the item you won online. Going back to when I was a kid, rumors and gossip were insane. Like, stupidly insane. There was no way to confirm anything you heard. Pretty much every celebrity was queer, according to someone else. Town gossip was out of control. Everyone was cheating on everyone else. If you were a kid, the lies about video game codes and secrets were abundant. Do you know you can play as Sonic in Mario 3? Stuff like that all the time. Christmas wish books were the highlight of the year. Even if you were a poor kid, getting one and looking at the thousands of items you could get is awesome. Toys, games, clothes, etc. They even had little boxes in the kids section where you could put a check mark to give your parents to show them what you wanted for Christmas. I remember in '98 getting a Game Boy. I didn't even know they existed because they just came out. I lived in the country and never saw any at a mall or anything. No kids at school had one, they didn't have any magazines or anything that talked about it. We only had a handful of TV channels and they never advertised them on the Canadian TV. So I was shocked when I got it, to say the least. Your fashion was 100% dictated by what was at your local mall or store. Unless you lived in a big city or something where you could order from a catalog, it was what was at the mall. So you'd go to school and it was not uncommon for kids to have the exact same shirt or hat as you did. I remember growing up, we only had 3 to 5 stores that sold kids' clothing and only 2 that my parents shopped at. So lots of Bugle Boy, Polo, Chip and Pepper, Too Rad for Mom and Dad, etc. Clothing for me and all the kids I knew. I think one kid had a biker leather jacket at school and he was the envy of hundreds of kids. Hard labor. Kids were expected to do it. I lived on a farm. The amount of time spent in fields in the heat of summer with a bucket, picking endless stones, would shock most kids today. Just all summer, long hours spent in a day, stripping fence posts, digging out ditches and trenches, chopping down trees. I learned to drive the mower and tractor before first grade. I was taught to drive a car in the field right after. What's funny now is that my dad refused to let me drive in his backhoe at 39 years old. I had to remind him I was driving the John Deere when I was little and cheering boulders from the fields, and he was like, "Times have changed." He eventually relented, but still, it's funny how his mentality has changed since then. No seat belts. Kids were flopping and climbing all over the car. I used to sit on my dad's lap pretending to drive the family wagon down the road and holding the steering wheel. The backward-facing seat in the wagon allowed us to wave at cars as we drove by. Shooting with pellet toy guns as kids, climbing trees, doing flips off the barn into the lawn, jumping out of my bedroom windows into snowbanks on the lawn, throwing objects at trees, blowing stuff up with fireworks, driving dirt bikes through town, getting a note from mom to go to the store to get her smokes, making potato weapons, hucking crab apples at each other. I remember when I was young, I ran away from home at like 7 a.m. I came home at 7 p.m. And my parents didn't even know I ran away. They just thought I was at a friend's or a neighbor's house or something. Having to wait for the antenna to pick up the channels you wanted to watch, needing a second telephone line to use the internet, 14.4 kbps internet modems that would download at a maximum of 4 to 5 kbps. It takes 30 minutes to check your email. It takes 3 to 4 minutes to download one picture. It takes 5 to 10 minutes to turn on the computer. When CDs came out, they were $50 each and there were maybe 5 available at the music store and 4 of them were compilations of 50s and 60s music. If you walked too hard in the house, you'd skip the CD player in the other end of the house. I could go on forever. I now own a retro video game and nostalgia store full of all the awesome stuff we had from the 80s through the 2000s. As insane as those times were, so many people are nostalgic for them. Story 2. Kids think things aren't as simple as they see on TV. They were, for better and for worse. Mom drove up to a service station. When the car rolled over the small hoses in the ground, the bell went off. Ding ding. A young man in overalls came running out and began filling the tank, checked the oil, washed the windows, and checked the tire pressure, all before the tank was full. Then he'd complete the cash transaction and off you went. The world stopped at the edge of your town. If you knew something far away, you wrote letters with a postage stamp. Most people had telephones, but answering machines didn't come around for a long time. And if someone moved without leaving a forwarding address or didn't tell you, they stopped existing. There was just no way to find them. I'm going to the store. When will I be back? When I get back. What if you need me? I don't know what to say. Yes, I have a diamond in my pocket for a phone booth in case something happens. If the car broke down, you just walked until you found a phone booth or sat on the side of the road until someone stopped to help. Service stations all carried paper maps, but you had to talk to people too. They'd say things like, "Well, the last fuel for 200 miles is up yonder, so if you keep driving, you'd best make sure you have a full tank before you head out. If you had a bike, the world was your oyster on Saturdays, whether you liked it or not. The last cartoon stopped at 9:30 a.m., and then you weren't allowed in the house until dinner. Riding with friends to the railroad tracks because you found a penny, you could put it on the tracks when a train came and then pick up the smashed penny and keep it. And then you find a quarter in the dirt, and it's off to the corner market because they sell caps. You can't afford a cap gun, but you can find 2 rocks and you can smash caps for an hour or 2. You have to go? Find a grass field to the side of a warehouse because you're not allowed home until dinner. You're hungry? There's usually a blackberry bush or a crab apple tree you can swipe something from, and then wash off any bird droppings in a creek. You're thirsty? Lots of houses have garden hoses out front. Don't get caught or be faster on your bike than the person can run. Paper checks were another one. There weren't ATMs, so you got a paper check and had to go to the bank during banking hours. You could withdraw money, and you could write a check. But if the place you wanted to go didn't take checks, like a movie theater, and you didn't have cash, you just didn't get to go. You had to wait until the bank opened Monday morning. You didn't have the means to contact anyone when you were in trouble? That sounds very scary. Story 3. The other day, I heard someone say that they remembered something that was in the news back when they were kids, and some younger guy very authoritatively told them that you can't remember anything from before your preteens except for a few core memories, unless you were directly involved in the events. Younger people don't realize previous generations like mine didn't grow up with smartphones, tablets, the internet, a million channels on TV, etc. So yes, we actually were aware of a lot of stuff that was happening in the world, including the major events in the news, regardless of whether we were old enough to understand what they meant, and we remember a ton of things from our actual lives. Why wouldn't we? I mean, we didn't have an avalanche of content to keep us distracted, no video games that lasted hundreds of hours, no TV or film on demand, just a handful of channels that went offline during the night and didn't exactly broadcast interesting stuff all day, etc. Claiming everything before your preteens is mostly a fog of vague emotions, and you can only remember, say, the fall of the Berlin Wall or the explosion of the Challenger if you were directly involved in a very weird take, in my opinion, given how much I remember very clearly from my childhood, including a lot of the important news stories of the day. I don't know if the kid who said that is expressing a popular opinion among younger people that honestly reflects their experience, but I did find the claim really weird. Story 4. I grew up in the 50s and 60s. Having carcinoma automatically means you won't survive. No one knew there were different types that had different survival rates and treatments. My mother was active as a volunteer for the ACM. She drove patients to treatment, which was cobalt. I don't recall what was done, but it was later determined to be a failure. We collected donations, which were given to the society. This devotion she had was spurred by the fact that her mother, my grandmother, passed away because of the same illness. There was nothing to be done. My grandfather drove to Mexico and bought medicine that he hoped would be the cure. She was gone at 39. My mother had it too in 1969. She had a radical mastectomy and survived. The America I grew up in had prosperity after World War II. Middle-class families bought houses and raised us kids in public schools for the most part, but it was a repressive and male-dominated time. When I became a young adult, I was ripe for the revolution of the 1960s. I became a hippie, moving to Berkeley and becoming an activist. We made a difference. We did actually influence society into opposition. We were young and idealistic and naive. It is much harder to be that innocent now. We see and hear so much that people are more cynical, and I think they feel they cannot affect change in our society. But change comes for the better when idealists, the young, have the energy to devote themselves to change. Be that change. This world is yours despite the horrible shape it's in because we didn't know better or put profit above morality. Well, grass is legal, the newer generations are more neutral, anti-discrimination, and politically involved, and there are so many creatives out there. The hippies got what they wanted. Story 5. My grandmother smoked basically every second she was awake, from middle school to the age of 75. She loved it and said she would never stop. She did it in her house and car, even in bed. I used to stay with her a lot. I went to a strict private school for high school. They were on campus, off campus, which meant you had to conduct yourself the same way at home as at school. The parents were out of town for 2 weeks, so I had to stay with my grandparents. I knew I smelled like an ashtray. What could I do? I had to stay with her. Even my hair smelled like it. So I'm at school and I get called out of class and sent to the principal. He explained to me that several teachers had complained that I smelled bad and he knew I had been smoking before I came to school. I told them I was staying at my grandparents and my grandmother smoked nonstop and that's why. They said that was not true because even my hair smelled like it. That only happens if you smoke. So they were about to suspend me and then they called my parents. My parents had to tell them I was staying with my grandparents and that's why. I was so embarrassed and self-conscious until my parents got back and had to go home. Also, when we moved my grandparents to another house, we took down everything from the wall. We realized the walls were yellow from smoke. Where something had hung, the walls were bright white. I often wondered what my grandmother's lungs looked like after this. Story 6. Making fun of people in school. It's not their fault, though. Watch TV shows like The Big Bang Theory. How the guys will talk about being made fun of. Things like being put into lockers and other cute cliché garbage are used for cheap laughs. That's not what it is at all. What it is being in the 3rd grade and hiding behind some bushes from the 3 or 4 a-holes, all of them bigger than you, that hunt you down after school every day. The tingling fear of seeing them walk by, hoping to all of heaven that they don't see you. The lightning bolt feeling when you're running at full tilt towards home and someone grabs your coat and you know what's about to happen. It's not cute. It's not a joke. And your parents are just thinking, that's just how it is. And your teachers are not giving a damn. And having nowhere to go, nobody to talk to about it, and nothing anyone can do to help. Being alone and knowing it's coming again tomorrow? Sleep tight. That's what it actually is. These days, at least, teachers and school personnel appear to be motivated to stop it. It's taken more seriously. Much more. I'm glad it is. I don't begrudge children today not knowing what I know. I'm happy for them. But they'll never understand what it actually was. Glad those times are over now. It's good to hear that things are changing for the better, you know. The past decades have been incredibly fascinating, though. If you think so too, like and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads like this one. Story 7. I was born in 1949. What today's young people don't appreciate is how, growing up, we had to invent our own sources of fun. There were no video games, which I enjoy playing, just 3 channels and a black and white TV. We didn't get color until 1967, and no real entertainment aimed at kids. All we could do was interact with each other and play established games like marbles or maybe an organized sport like Little League Baseball. There was a baseball diamond, overgrown with plants, across the street from us, but mostly we played in the woods that surrounded us, climbing trees, pretending to be pirates or some such. I loved the bookmobiles that would visit my street, and I must have read every biography, all bound in blue covers, in my elementary school library. It was a different era with many fewer distractions and much more time for sustained imagination. Being in a different place and time, we developed different skills for interacting with the world and each other than young people do today. Was it better? That's hard to say. We tended to have an insular view of our own little world, while today it is hard to escape what is happening everywhere on Earth. We had to wait days for a letter to arrive, and we shared a party line with our neighbor's phone. That is a far slower pace than today's instantaneous texting culture. Yes, I do text. Some things have been lost, while others have been gained. That's the way it will always be. Story 8. I sometimes don't think millennials understand just how similar the circumstances were to Gen X. It's just how we reacted to them. We were really being pressed to go to college, but we had a major recession during that time. However, we did not move back in with our parents. We moved in with roommates. People wonder where friends, living single, etc. came from. We refused to move back home. In Oakland, we had a 4-bedroom home. We made it for 8 people. During the summer, we charged the band Deadheads from Europe for $100 a month to sleep in a sleeping bag to reduce our rent. I contrasted it to my son's friends who either stayed home to have no college debt or those who moved back home after college. These are actually people who are teachers, engineers, or assistant managers of local pharmacies, but they all live at home. Their parents are happy to have them there, but their parents also buy food, do laundry, etc. When my kid came home, since he was a freshman in college, his laundry was his own. In fact, his laundry has been his own since he was in 7th grade. Nobody wants to stay in our house as a roommate unless they are willing to be treated as a roommate. Story 9. How hard life was, and how comparatively easy and good it is now. I've had 2 friends who, in recent months, have had children born with conditions that would have been terminated even 20 years ago. But with today's medical advances, they will likely live full lives. Of course, these treatments are very expensive, but obviously, it's a price they will gladly pay. Young people today complain about the cost of healthcare as some abomination and yet totally fail to appreciate how good our medical system is. Young people today complain about 40-hour work weeks as if it's a violation of human rights, but even when I was a kid, I worked long days in high school. My grandparents told stories about their childhood and lives in the Depression where if you stopped working in 40 hours, you simply starved. My grandmother grew up with 6 siblings in a 2-bedroom apartment with a single mother. Now, people with 2,000-square-foot homes complain because they pay so much in rent that they have to take fewer vacations. Never before in human history have so many people enjoyed so much luxury. Story 10. Bygone eras were body-positive havens that embraced curves and the natural variants of the human form. No. The way Gen Z, as well as exceptionally privileged and myopic millennials, talk about the 90s sometimes is the same way we saw the 50s and the 90s. People buying a house from raising 2.5 kids with a stay-at-home wife with only salary from the plant and kids running free without supervision. I think the 90s were fantastic, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't Leave It to Beaver. Neither were the 50s, or so I'm told. Everyone I knew had 2 parents working in some capacity, jobs being shipped overseas had long been a topic of discussion, and frankly, the only reason we were outside instead of inside staring at iPads was because they hadn't been invented yet. The boomers 100% would have stuck an iPad in our hands if they'd had the opportunity. They were being derided as overprotective helicopter parents, creating a generation of softies because we wore seatbelts and got participation trophies at 3-year-old T-ball. Yeah, the past eras tore you down for how you looked. Story 11. How pop culture amalgamates stuff into one big blob and, in reality, it goes out in little dribbles over decades until it's distilled by time. Lots of young folks will talk crap about older movies and they finally watch them and complain that it's not even that good. Why did anyone like it? And they have legitimately zero understanding that at the time, that was the only movie about X or Y that anyone had seen, ever. And so yeah, it actually was pretty exciting. Also how rare it was to be able to watch media like TV or movies repeatedly. It just wasn't a thing. You missed a show? Too bad. Good luck catching a rerun at some point later. Really liked the movie? Well, it's out of theater, so you can't watch it again until maybe it gets edited and played on TV. So many people just didn't have VCRs. The way we consumed entertainment 100% does not exist anymore, and it really did inform how we interacted with it. Story 12. That feminism isn't some old concept from the distant past. In the US, gender discrimination in education wasn't outlawed until 1972, which just happened to be the same year unmarried women were legally allowed access to contraceptives. Additionally, prior to 1974, women were not allowed to have credit cards or loans in their own names. They were simply authorized users of their husband's credit cards. Some employers also required married women to have their husband's permission before they were offered employment. When people talk about how women in the 1950s and 1960s stayed married, even when the marriage was clearly rocky, it was less about devotion and more to do with a lack of equal access to education, work, and finances. The divorce rate skyrocketed in the 70s, but not because women were suddenly wanton and looking for a good time. It was because they were no longer forced to remain in a bad marriage as a matter of financial survival. You couldn't have credit cards and loans in your own name? That's just crazy. That was only 50 years ago. Story 13. There was a horrible amount of poverty in the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s. The whole thing about one job supporting a family of 4 is not true at all. However, until Reagan came along and destroyed benefits for struggling people, they had government help. They also don't understand how absolutely horrible it could be for women in the workplace. Our mothers and grandmothers had to fight to be treated decently, not to mention equally. Limited opportunity and unequal pay for the same work. My mother was forced to quit her job when she was 5 months pregnant because pregnant women shouldn't work. Same with my grandma, but she was made to quit teaching when she got married. This is just the tip of the iceberg. These young people misconceptions about the past definitely made us question how much we truly know about the past, right? But hey, if you love more debunking stories, check out What's a Childhood Mystery You Finally Solved? Story 1 is so relatable. Maybe it happened to you too. See you there.